There's always lots of news happening, lots to discuss, and more importantly, what we do with this show, as you well know, is we dig in deep. We get guests on the show that aren't afraid to share their values and discuss what it is that they're doing to make the world a much better place with their curiosity and their courage. And I have to say that our first guest, David Maywald, is one of those. He's an author, among many other things. His book is titled The Relentless War on Masculinity. And I'm looking forward to hearing David's views, particularly about gender equity and all sorts of matters that David discusses. David, welcome to the show.
It's lovely to be here. And I was just recently on a couple of calls with colleagues in North America, Europe and England, but much nicer to slide into the Australian time zone with sun rising, and lovely to be here with you, Cheryl.
Good, thanks, David. And indeed, you've got a bit of history with the States, haven't you? You did some studies at Harvard, I believe.
I have done some executive education through them, and I found it to be really valuable to connect to peers and advocates in other countries.
Now, tell me, you've got this outstanding book, The Relentless War on Masculinity. Let's start at the very beginning. What had you decide that a book was required to explore this very topic?
I felt very strongly about the imbalances and the disparities that boys face in education, that men face in longevity and health. There's a mountain of evidence behind it in comparison to really measly funding and programs which really don't address the substance of the issues.
So effectively what we're saying is that there are disadvantages that men are facing, yet we're constantly hearing in the media that it is women who are discriminated against. Has the pendulum swung too far?
I think the vast majority of people believe that. And it's not just me calling this a war. If you go back to Christine Hoff Sommers, she wrote The War Against Boys in 2000. And then in 2013, Suzanne Benker wrote The War on Men. And more recently, Nancy Pearcey, a couple of years ago, wrote The Toxic War on Masculinity. So this is very well known, but for the last 3 decades or so, there's been a relentless campaign to silence, shame, and to belittle and denigrate men and boys.
They're very strong words. Silence, shame, belittle and denigrate men and boys. It's horrendous to think that young boys, you mentioned schools, we'll get to that shortly, but young boys are confused about who they are, how they're valued, and what they're expected to be doing in terms of behaviour, even particularly those young boys who are growing up with responsible families and attending schools that highly respect and regard young boys. So where is all this bad messaging coming from?
So we culturally and legally fractured families, and we've set up really perverse incentives for the separation of mothers and fathers, which is horrendous for all children. We've known the negative legacy of divorce for decades now, and I cite one reference specifically in my book. Following that, so you didn't have the same type of connection between fathers and their children as was the case 60 or 70 years ago. That particularly impacted on boys because they really need their fathers and they really need a loving group of elder males to be around them to safely and effectively transition through adolescence into manhood. Following that, there was a feminisation of education systems, which had taken us from almost one extreme to another. So back in the 60s and 70s, there clearly were some disparities that didn't favour girls. Now there are many, many disparities that disfavour boys and young men. So we've taken away the healthy, masculine influences and guidance that steadied and put boundaries around where boys were transiting through those crucial years. And instead, we have let them fall off that rickety bridge of adolescence, and we've also pushed all men onto the back foot so that they can't even speak their truth. They can't even share their feelings and their thoughts.
You mentioned families, and this is one of the topics that comes up time and again on our show, as it should. And you're talking about right back in the 70s, and 1975 is when the Family Law Act was introduced. Do you believe that was the beginning of this national movement? Because clearly there were plans in play well before the Act was passed in Parliament. So things were on foot, but it was the Act itself that created this long, slow march against men. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree. It crystallised some of the bubbling cultural changes that were already there. It also significantly empowered the non-Christian forces and feminist forces, both of which have undermined the family as the crucial institution in our society.
I'm lost for words when you said that. And the reason why I'm lost for words is that I, like you, have been looking at this for many years. In fact, my journey on this one, it began back in 1986 when my brother died. He was 25. And the statistics then for male suicide, and it was alleged that my brother committed suicide. I disagree with that, but that's another story for another day. The suicide figures then were not much different to what they are today. And one could argue that, with population growth and so forth, it's expected that, figures can be bandied around and differ slightly. But there is no justification for all those years that we haven't focused on the health of men as much as we should. And this constant barraging, as you say, of the breakdown of the family unit stems from an abuse of what was rightly a feminist movement for equal opportunity. So there are women who have lost their way, men who are suffering, and there are a group of people who are driving all of this. Who do you think they might be?
Well, there are beneficiaries of these movements, and you can see that in terms of small cohorts of women who are highly educated and earning very high income, sometimes for not delivering any value for our society, and largely concentrated around government-funded services. So I think it's not too hard to follow that money. But when I think about this, I also look across, like I said, the aspect of anti-Christian, very strong sentiment, pushing against Catholic churches and others, and the desire to shape young minds through march through those education institutions, which was inspired by Marxist approaches to indoctrination and to shaping the narratives and discourse of future generations. That's not healthy for anyone. That's not healthy for girls and young women. It's not healthy for boys and young men. And we see that, for example, in the overemphasis that has been put on the benefits of delaying childbirth compared to the overemphasis of the costs of early childbirth. Instead of having a mature, honest, balanced conversation with young people about the trade-offs, when it makes sense in terms of your maximum fertility, when you can study, not just being university after school. You can go back and study after you've had kids. I know lots of men and women have done that and have gone on to amazing heights in their careers or in studying businesses. So it's a very unbalanced discourse that has been shaped specifically around female empowerment. And it has ignored, like I said, mountains of evidence that gives us a much more nuanced and granular picture of the reality.
I did some research about a decade ago and came across a paper out of San Francisco. You'd be most interested in this, I'm sure. This comes back to your comment about schools earlier. And this was a research paper that was designed to have women infiltrate the education sector with the view that if they could control the education sector, they could control any other sector. And they chose Victoria, Australia, as the trial location. Does that surprise you?
Not at all.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Because that's exactly what we've seen. And what I'm really frustrated with, I have to say, is that we've got this movement, but it never, ever ends. The dial keeps shifting. There's more demands as things go on. So, for example, we've got the majority of educators in schools being women, and yet that's still not good enough. There's a push for not enough leaders in schools who are women. And at the same time, we've got unions providing enterprise agreements enabling paid time off during the day for breastfeeding. So it's a constant battle and struggle to identify what is valued and what is not when it's all demands are on the table and okay when it comes to women. And yet when it comes to men, as you said, they're silenced and really struggling. So what sorts of things are you doing to overcome this?
So through the book, I've tried to highlight the prevalence of double standards. And one easy way that people can think about this is, do you treat males and females equally? Do you give them the same opportunities? Do you have the same compassion and empathy for them? And there's a classic test for this. If you don't know your response until you're aware of the biological sex of the protagonist, then it's highly likely that you have a strong bias or asymmetry in how you treat males and females, in the different reactions that you have to men and women. So I'm trying to encourage people to become aware of that, and also, to push back when they see really egregious examples of this, whether it's in the media or at the school or from government or in their workplace or amongst their friends or their family, to call it out and to say, that's not fair. You're not treating people the same. We need to uplift everyone. We've got to give everyone opportunities and have sensible discussions about this. That's the first step. I also put out a survey which got over 240 responses about specific advocacy goals for boys and men over the next 12 months or so. And that really goes to targeted measures on suicide prevention. It goes to fair funding of health services that meet the needs of males. And it also goes to creating a boy-positive education environment where we actually honour and cherish the other half of our student population.
Well, it sounds like you've got some good initiatives. You're listening to 88.9 Win FM, the Cheryl Lacey Show, where curiosity meets courage. And we're speaking with David Maywald, and he's the author of The Relentless War on Masculinity and a very strong advocate for the value of boys and men in society. David, I understand that you're also a company director or a member of many, many boards that are also not-for-profit. What are your views on gender quotas?
I'm a board member of 2 registered charities and a committee member of an investment committee. I have served on about 20 governance roles in the last 30 years or so. So I see there's a small space for them, but only really in exceptional circumstances. And my view is that they shouldn't force artificial outcomes. And what I worry about is that as we try to push, say, more and more girls and women into engineering or STEM, that it becomes much, much harder for each incremental 1% or 5% of the workforce to change. And unfortunately, what you see empirically is there's often a high dropout rate. So after you've saturated your sort of natural population proportion, to get the extra 5% or 1% or 10%, you're going to people who might not necessarily have strong interest or fit or long-term longevity in those roles. And it's really unfortunate that these programs, both for sex and for racial backgrounds and other backgrounds, unfortunately, many of them have not been successful because they have targeted equality of outcomes and they haven't thought through the medium to long-term implications. And it's really sad to see some people pulled or pushed or cajoled into taking up roles that they eventually don't find fulfilling and that they drop out of in high numbers.
Indeed. And you've got some strong involvement with International Men's Day. Now, we know that's not until November again of this year, the 19th of November. The 2025 event wasn't long ago. That offers scholarships and mentoring, among other things. And it seems to me that there's a lovely correlation there with what you've just said, that mentoring for men through this scholarship, for example, giving the opportunity for them to work alongside and be mentored by other directors of not-for-profits or organisations and companies would be of tremendous value. And there are many, many instances of that being on offer for women. So there are opportunities for the right people to come on board, and it begins with their enthusiasm, as you said, and their desire to do so. Is that International Men's Day initiative growing?
So the Award for Men in Leadership founded in 2023, and it has given out 4 awards, which are scholarships and mentoring and some coaching as well. And that's been to uplift some really high calibre and younger men who have significant leadership potential. But by the way, we don't need to wait till November. International Boys' Day is on the 16th of May. So prompt your schools, get out there and ask them, what are you doing to celebrate boys and to uplift boys and to give boys equal opportunities and to narrow the literacy gap and to support boys in their writing? We've got Men's Health Week, which is a big national and international event in June, in the middle of June. So there are lots of things on the bigger calendar here, and we can do a lot more to celebrate and uplift the other half of the population, not to the detriment of girls and women. This is about having healthy relationships, and it's about having a more harmonious society.
It seems to me, David, that what's most important, and you highlighted this at the very beginning, is families and also faith, Christian faith particularly, and particularly with Australia as well, founded on those principles. What also strikes me, you mentioned men or young boys at schools with reading and with literacy, with writing, etc. This was something that was going on when I first started teaching in the 80s. And there was a big push for young boys to read books about sport, and there were a lot of fiction books that were coming out around football and other things to try to get boys to read. One of the things that I find extraordinary, not only that we're still having this conversation, it's this generational concern that continues. And likely, as you said, it stems back to the breakdown of the family unit.
Mm.
So from that context, I personally would like to see the Family Law Act repealed. Would you?
I can tell you from the sentiment that I've got from that survey, from over 240 responses, and that includes some women as well as mostly men, there's a very strong feeling that it's broken and not fit for purpose, and a strong desire for significant change. And just to mention one aspect, one of the respondents pointed to the increase in male suicides since the first act was passed, and the different changes have been made in terms of shared parenting. And when you look at that chart, the incredible rise in male suicide in comparison to female suicide being pretty stable or flat over that period, it's really, it takes your breath away. It hits me in the guts to see that.
Mm. Look, I couldn't agree more, and I'm going to put you in touch with some people that I have on the show. We are working very hard at having these conversations for families, and I know that your work is extremely important, and I'm really pleased that we've connected and that you've come onto the show. There's more work to be done, and that's what we're here for, is to have these conversations. And I'm, again, David, grateful for your time and effort today, and I wish you well with everything, and we have to keep in touch, and we've got to get you back. We're aiming to have, perhaps in 6 weeks' time or so, thereabouts, a show dedicated to men, boys and the health of families. So I'd love you to be part of that too.
Fantastic to hear. So good to speak with you.
And you too, David. Have a great day. God bless.
Cheers.
Thank you. That was David Maywald, and he is the author of The Relentless War on Masculinity, and some very important points he's made there. These are points that we are sharing, discussing, exploring time and again, and the breakdown of the family unit is clearly at the core of so many of these social issues that we have, and we're not having enough conversations about this. generally in society. We're doing it here on the show, and very grateful for listeners that do phone in and send text messages regarding their desire to see more emphasis on the family unit. So please continue to do that.